data. And hi, so today I'm going to look at chapter 4. Again, I'm going to go over what the learning objectives are and provide a little bit more information in summary of those learning objectives. Chapter 4 is exploratory research designs and data collection approaches. So the objectives are identifying some of the major differences between what's called qualitative and quantitative research, understanding in-depth interviewing, and then focus groups as questioning techniques. We will also go into a little bit more detail about what focus groups are and how you conduct a focus group. Also, we're going to talk about observation methods and explaining how they're used to collect primary data, and then explaining qualitative data and some of the different qualitative data methods such as ethnography, what's called case studies, a new and evolving study called netnography, projective techniques, and then something called ZMET. So first, identifying the major differences between qualitative and quantitative research. In business, we've got a couple of different choices to make when we decide that we're going to collect primary research. So you really get into, is it qualitative, or is it quantitative that you're going to look at? So those are the two general types. And then within qualitative, you have some of those different choices like I mentioned. Qualitative methods usually are used in what we talked about in the last chapter called exploratory research. They give you some of the initial or preliminary insights into decision making or the problems created in the decision making process. Or they also are really good techniques for looking at really complex consumer decision making. So when you think about some of the bigger ticket kinds of items of what's the process that people go through in order to buy a house, buy a refrigerator, buy a car, where you've got a little bit of a bigger ticket item, and then when you're talking about maybe some of the new technologies that come onto market where there is an existing data already that for that purchase decision, that would be where another good area to use qualitative research. Some of the other complexities that you can use qualitative research for would be when you're looking at the culture or even a subcultural context. So on the surface it may seem that a decision is being made for a particular reason, but when you really look at it in the context of the culture, that's where you may get more insight, and you're not going to get that insight unless you're able to do some of these qualitative methods, which are a little bit more probing. The thing about qualitative research is with all kinds of primary research collection, data collection, is they all have different kinds of skills. And in primary data collection, when you're using qualitative research, it really depends on interpersonal communication skills, the ability to not just ask questions and ask them in a way that are relatively innocuous while they're still being probing, but really more importantly in many ways it's also your listening technique. So it's really the interpersonal communication. Lots of times in qualitative research, the use of what's called open-ended questions. So it's not just a yes or a no or a scale kinds of a question when you're doing the more quantitative things where you have on a scale of 1 to 7. It's open-ended, and you're provided the opportunity, if you're being asked the question, to give more information. So it would be, provide me with more information or tell me more about what you were thinking when you were doing that. And it's not something that's limited to a short essay, short answer or a scale. While qualitative data can be collected quickly, it really does take, it takes that skill set where you can gather the information, and you can maybe gather that in a relatively short amount of time. The challenge usually comes from when you go to analyze it. So it really gets into not only your ability to take that information and analyze it, but analyze it without putting on your own biases. When you're doing qualitative research, it's lots of time, it's a small sample, so there's some of the challenges of it not being a random sample and not being able to be, or it's not considered generalizable to the larger population of the interest, your target of interest, your market of interest. Whereas quantitative methods are related to are more related to the descriptive and causal types of research, and quantitative researchers then are trained in scale measurement, questionnaire design, sampling methodology, and as well as the statistical techniques and software that you would use in order to analyze the quantitative data. Understanding in-depth interviewing, so again, going back to the qualitative piece of this, in-depth interviewing and focus groups as questioning techniques. So as it sounds, you're talking more about trying to get at some of the underlying thought processes or feelings and attitudes that really aren't just on the surface, but really kind of really digging in there. So an in-depth interview is a formal process of asking called a subject, so the person that you're trying to get the information from, a set of basically semi-structured questions where you're probing. These are probing questions, and it's in a face-to-face setting. Focus groups then would be not one-on-one. It would be where there are usually 8 to 10 people, and what you're really trying to do is trying to gather information from a variety of people all at the same time. So you have the same environment where all of these people are then providing you with more background or more insight through the process. Now, in-depth interviewing and focus groups both have similar objectives. They're to provide data for defining or redefining what your marketing problem is. Again, you're gaining those insights, so you will have maybe a better or a different idea of how you want to go about pursuing your marketing plan, or collecting additional data. Provides better data for understanding the results from previously completed quantitative. So what does that mean? So what it means is that you may have done a quantitative study and you have some initial results, and there's something that either was a surprise to you or was concerning to you, and what you do then is you can do a follow-up using qualitative, again, to do that more in-depth and probing kind of questions to get to really more of the root of why people responded the way they did in the quantitative. And then it also helps to reveal and understand better consumers' what they call hidden or unconscious needs or wants. Again, I mentioned that when you're looking at, it's not just kind of this initial reaction, but after that initial reaction, there's something more deeply that's driving what it is how these decisions are being made, or what the root of these attitudes are. And then we also use it to generate new ideas about products. So you might do it to look at different kinds of products, colors, and the way that the products are provide kind of the features and benefits. And then they also are used to discover what we called before in the last chapter, which was constructs or even measurement methods. So again, if you're looking at what are the variables that go into a particular construct, or maybe there's some additional variables you would like to look at adding to a construct that would help better explain when we talked about the independent variables. So take those independent variables and it may help to better explain the dependent variable. So defining a focus group, and what do you do to conduct a focus group? Again, it's a small group. It's 8 to 10 people, 8 to 12 people. They're brought together, and it's very interactive. There's a lot of techniques that go into a focus group, facilitating a focus group. Again, that's a particular skill set where the person who is actually doing the facilitating tries to do the facilitating, but doesn't interject themselves really into the process. But there are specific skills to make sure that there isn't groupthink that goes on, or that you don't have one person who's doing all of the talking and everybody else is kind of hanging back, just letting that person talk. So there's different set of skills that go into facilitating. A focus group has what's called 3 phases. It's not just set about willy-nilly that you just pull a group of people together and start asking questions. You have a planning phase, which comes back again as to what are the objectives of what it is that you're trying to accomplish with your study. the actual conducting of the focus group. So, when you actually would gather them, where you're going to gather them, how they're going to be observed. Many times they're videotaped and recorded. You also have the ability to have a one-way mirror so that somebody else can be sitting and observing the group. And then the last phase is where you analyze and you provide the reports. So again, a different set of skills. After you collect all of that information, you go about looking at what answers people provided and what else was going on. When you're looking at the observation methods and explaining the objective of discussing the observation methods and explaining how they're used to collect primary data. Again, we're talking about primary data, which means we're not getting this from somewhere else. We're actually conducting the research ourselves. So you've got all of these different observation methods. One is, like we just talked about, a focus group. Lots of times these are, again, exploratory because you're asking a new question or it's a new product and you're trying to gain some insights into something that hasn't already been addressed, or it has a new product or a new feature or a new benefit, and you're trying to look specifically at what value those features and benefits bring. So it's exploratory, but it also can be descriptive and causal. Qualitative data collection methods, I talked about there being ones other than the one-on-one in-depth, as well as the focus groups. These are called ethnography. You've got case studies, and then something called projective techniques. So again, these are used for the same reasons that we talked about. They're exploratory. It's really good ways of getting in and trying to really get in and understand really in a situation, even when you're talking about ethnography, where you're really looking at what else is going on in the environment and how people are interacting with each other. Case studies, we've all probably heard of those in our studies in college, where you look at the details of a particular event, what was going on in the market when these business decisions were being made, what was the top management team doing, what's their background, and it really gets into all of the particular details that led up to a particular event. Then we also have, those have to do with extended contact, so you're looking at people or the situation over a period of time and trying to get that information. Netnography, again, I said is something new. It's a qualitative research where you're using text and images and produced in online communities. Again, so this is something that's relatively new because of the internet, and it's really looking at how people interact with the internet and the text on a website, or the video images on a website. And then there's other things that researchers can use that are called word association or sentence completion, or where you're looking at pictures and cartoons and you're coming up with a story about what's going on in those particular scenes, as well as something called ZMET. These are all different indirect techniques to access, again, consumers' feelings, not what they would just write down as an initial kind of a feeling, but some of the more in-depth and underlying culture kinds of things that are going on. And that ends chapter